Hey everyone, just to say, this episode is brought to you by Theater Kids by John DeVore. That's right, the same John DeVore who you heard here on this podcast discussing Dune, Dune 1, Dune 2, and Willow. So, Theater Kids has been described as a Valentine to the New York City theater scene in the late 90s. And I can say, as a former theater kid myself, or I guess maybe I get to keep the moniker, I'm not sure. It's a real blast. It's a really fun read. And it got me thinking about my time in the theater, where I was villager number 3 in Fiddler on the Roof. So I think I was also the understudy to the knife grinder. So it was good times, but short-lived. And I'm really enjoying the book. So check it out, Theater Kids by John DeVore. Now on to the episode.
Because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in the field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
And I'm Laura.
And today we're kicking off CRIMEWAVE Summer with Michael Mann's 2009 Public Enemies. And we're joined by Liam Billingham and Phil Gawthorne, the two hosts of Die Hard on a Blank, a show that explores the influence of Die Hard on action movies throughout the 90s and beyond. Welcome, Liam and Phil.
Hey guys, this rocks.
We're so glad to have you. Yeah, excited. And so you guys suggested Public Enemies, and we're thinking, well, it's a crime movie. Seems like we should let's do a crime series. So we decided to put together a CRIMEWAVE Summer, which includes Public Enemies, Scarface, and then The Bling Ring finally. So it's a 3-part miniseries.
Ooh.
And you picked Public Enemies. And so I want to, this is one of the more overlooked Michael Mann films. Tell us something about the film that gets you hyped.
Well, first of all, the fact that we both nodded instead of verbally agreeing with you just shows our acumen as podcasters. We're like, Phil, you should go first because we have barely discussed this film, so I want you to start.
Everything about this movie gets me hyped. The aesthetic, the themes, the acting, the sheer filmmaking, chutzpah of it. Everything about this movie that just coalesces for me so spectacularly. I was thinking about this term as well. One of the things I love about it, and I may have heard this somewhere else and be passing it off as my own. I don't know, but one of the things I love most about Michael Mann, who is one of my all-time favorite filmmakers, this idea kind of came to me when I was watching this film. Lyrical realism. He is able to do both concurrently as a filmmaker, as an artist. This is a pretty scrupulously researched movie. I mean, if you listen to his commentary, he can rattle off, okay, and such a person was in this penitentiary for this amount of days and got out on this particular date, and all of this data is at his mental
Such
fingertips.
a Michael Mann
he knows
fact.
He's so obsessed with verisimilitude, right? Yeah. As we know from all of his films. At the same time, he's both a historian, and obviously this film takes certain dramatic license. It's not absolutely can't be. There are certain things that are robberies that are conflated and things like that. But he is both obsessed with accuracy, psychological accuracy, location, all of dates, all of these different things. At the same time, it's an incredibly poetic film. That is such a difficult tightrope to walk. And yet I think it's actually largely true of the majority of the films that he's made, especially if they've been based on some kind of historical truth, such as The Insider. And Heat, whilst a work of fiction, is based on is an extrapolation of true events, and Neil McCauley was a real person, and it was based on Chuck Adamson's life and pursuit of him, etc. So for me, it was, if I could distill it into one expression, it would be that notion of lyrical realism that I find incredibly captivating.
That's a great answer. Liam, before we hype up on lyrical realism, what for you gets you excited about?
So that was a great answer. I saw this movie in 2009, and I remember very clearly going to see it in the theater, and kind of being like, huh, that was really good, but like weird because it was, as Phil and I were talking about recently, it was like Christian Bale between the Batmans,
Mhm.
and Marion Cotillard had just made Inception. So I feel like I'd been like with these people in completely different roles like recently, and that's what they were in my mind as. And I was a little distracted by it. And when it ended, I was like, "That is this a movie about the bureaucracy of the 20th century, like completely consuming the individual and like rendering them kind of moot?" That was like my read of the movie, and I revisited it once during the pandemic, when it was on Netflix, and then revisiting it for this last week. Something really clicked with me, and that is Johnny Depp has this line when he's talking to Marianne Cotillard when they're in the I guess they're having dessert after meeting at the club that he's at, and he says, "Everybody's worried about where they came from. I'm worried about where I'm going," or something to
Yeah.
that effect. I wish I'd written it down,
Oh,
and I just feel like that like popped for me in terms of like Michael Mann, who we both like. It's almost a joke how much everybody loves Michael Mann on the internet now, but like. I was so taken aback by the idea that this movie is about two men like at the crossroads of history, and it's much more about that to me than it is specifically the crime, and how it sort of represents these guys who are kind of like romantically attracted to something that was going to in some ways completely disappear. And I said this to Phil this morning or yesterday on one of our numerous phone calls. I was like, I feel that at the end of this movie, I'm nostalgic for the idea of bank robbers.
Both of you have hit on something, which is that we have to situate this film in the context of Michael Mann's filmography. It's as this kind of part and parcel with the lyrical realism, which is woven throughout his filmography, and then also that there is this sort of there's this nostalgia and desire to return in some ways again and again to the crime genre, and I want to start with this. So. Michael Mann has made several movies about people who rob banks, most notably Heat, Thief, this one, and Cops and Robbers movies, Miami Vice. What is it that draws us and Michael Mann? But like, there's got to be something alchemical about bank robbery that draws us to it. Because John Dillinger, just to put it in the context of Dillinger, was famous because he robbed banks. Not famous because he ran a racketeering scam or worked for the mob or was a hitman or anything like that.
Or did kidnapping. He said the public doesn't like kidnapping.
Doesn't like kidnapping. It was robbing banks. And there's something cool and sexy about that. But what is it? What do you think it is?
I have a theory about this, and I was thinking about this exact thing today because I was listening to your episode about the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, where you asked this question as well, right? And you were trying to get underneath it. And I was thinking, I have a couple of theories as to what this is. James Cameron has talked about how films can function on multiple levels of sensory experience or intellectual experience. There's the primary level, and there's a secondary level, and there's a tertiary level that might be so deeply embedded into your subconscious that you can't even, it's very, very hard to grasp, right? I think one of the deeper levels, what's going on with the obsession with bank robbers and outlaws is a dark fantasy that we all have, because essentially we all have to follow some kind of rules in life, whether that's where we have a boss, or we have companies that we work for. We have sort of structured systems that govern us to some extent. And these characters represent the fantasy of breaking free of any of that and just doing what you wanted. And I referenced James Cameron because he said that was part of the tertiary level of understanding of the Terminator, because people loved the idea that the character of the Terminator could go into a police station and decimate people and just there were no rules. I don't mean literally that. I don't mean literally doing that. I mean literally driving a truck through whatever because I'm in pursuit of this goal, and rules don't apply. So I think that's one part of it, and the other part of it is I think it's a uniquely American to some extent conceit, and that it ties into the Old West and the frontier and deep-rooted ideas of freedom. In some cases, it's a dark freedom, the freedom to just go into a bank, pull a gun, and take take the money. And I think you'd said something in that episode about how it's the ultimate form of distilled capitalism, is to take a gun, which you could buy in America in most places relatively easily, point it at someone, get money, as long as cash still exists in the world, which it may not do for too much longer. So I think that would be my theory as to a couple of the converging factors that form the collectives, that feed into the collective psyche around that idea and the allure, the perennial allure of the outlaw.
I think, just one thing on that, Phil. I think, would you extend it also to Donald Trump? I mean, because Trump, in a way, is now our public enemy in some way, number one. Like, he's this guy who breaks all the rules, seems to get away with it, and has developed this real fascination and love of him in particular, potentially because of the things that you're saying, that he is the embodiment of this kind of ultimate freedom in a way.
Well, I think the term I heard that's really stayed with me, and I started using this term a lot about Trump, was the idea of being transgressive.
Yeah.
And that is, which connects to this in some way. He is a transgressor of all societal norms, all political norms, all norms of human decency, just everything that you take as a precept for someone in that role, and just a human being in general, he transgresses. So I think, again, there is probably, for certain people, the dark, that's appealing because it is the dark fantasy. What if I just said the most outrageous shit, no matter how politically incorrect, no matter how offensive, no matter how ill thought through or just shoot from the hip bullshit, and I could say whatever the fuck I want, and literally to the point where he's saying, to your point exactly, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, I think he said on the record, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. So in some ways, he's already framing himself as a political outlaw in that way. So I think that's part of what goes on for us in our unconscious mind around these types of outlaw figures.
I am so hype talking about this movie. I'm sorry.
Liam is just bouncing out of his chair right now.
Because Phil, you said so many things that are so smart about this movie, but I think, Michael Mann is part of a dying breed of white male in America who's like kind of working class to his very bone, right? Like in terms of his politics, in terms of how he looks at the world, but he's also like went to, grad school at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, and like was like really seeped in like philosophy, and like to listen to him with his Chicago accent talk about how Chris Shiherlis in Heat is an existentialist, like is really, it's so compelling. And I would say that like the one thing that I think Mann goes out of his way to do in all of these movies is, you could say that De Niro is a sociopath. You could say that Dillinger is like a hedonist who's living on his own sort of terms. But something they both say in both movies is, put your money away. We're not here for the bank. We're not here for your money. Yeah. We're here for the bank's money. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important distinction, because I think there's a romance to John Dillinger. And there's actually a romance to Neil McCauley. Neil McCauley lives for the romance, right? He lives for the, what's that? The line about what a regular life is, ball games and barbecues, right? And Dillinger is like the first celebrity of that, right? You can go back to Billy the Kid, maybe, but Dylan is the first media celebrity who's also a bank robber. One of the most interesting things about this movie is when certain characters say like, I'm a scout for the movies, what about robbing banks? Or Dillinger watching himself on the screen at the beginning of essentially film history and the newsreel, right? So he's like the first character framed this way, and he's concerned about his legacy. He's concerned about how he's seen. And I think what's so exciting is that, when you think about the 20th century, and how society centralized. I mean, the movie literally has this idea of like, hey, now that we can bust you for committing a crime when you cross state lines, like that's a whole new way. It's another one of Michael Mann's obsessions with networks and how like information is out there. And the Black Hat is is not only the follow-up to this movie, but is a spiritual sequel to this movie. And I think part of a trilogy that concludes with Ferrari in terms of like the 20th century and what happens in the 20th century. And what I think is really, really exciting is that Dillinger is romantic because he's pushing back against modernity. He's pushing back against the idea of like, instead of making $74,000 in a bank robbery, every one of these guys at these desks is going to make $74,000 today, right? Organized crime. And you can see how that plays out in terms of just his behavior in the movie and how it's really romantic versus Purvis, who's this like fucking conformist, kind of sad dude who like can't think for himself. And I think Bale is incredible in a kind of thankless role in that regard. And the fact that he's Batman at the same time is fascinating.
I know that's yes, that's right. Yeah, he's but there are two things here. So there's the public aspect and the romantic aspect. I don't want to lose track of both of those, and so I'm just mentioning them so we don't forget. But on the public part, the title of the film is Public Enemies, in part because Dillinger was labeled Public Enemy #1. But it's kind of like there's many readings of the notion of a public enemy. The enemy of the public, but also an enemy who is public, who's part of the public, who lives among the public. He himself talks about, I love the public, I hide out there. And somebody who gets his juice from the public. I use the word juice to call back to in Heat. What is, the action of Dillinger? Like, why does Dillinger rob banks rather than run a racketeering scheme where he could actually make far more money? One thought is that he doesn't know anything else, but another thought is that suddenly I'm giving a thumbs up. I don't know anyway. But another thought is that he desires something that's more than money. And this is to the romantic part. He desires, and one of the things you're mentioning, Liam, which I think is really nice, is actually both of you are mentioning, is that he's an iconoclast. He's pushing back against the bureaucratic machinations of the 20th century, the Purvises, what is going to become the FBI, who centralizes information and uses statistics and reduces things to numbers and forms that can be filled out, rather than a guy who just shoots from the hip and lives passionately and isn't thinking about tomorrow. Like, he's the opposite of Purvis in that regard, and there's something romantic about that.
So Purvis is also, to our larger Michael Mann conversation, the inverse of Vincent Hanna in Heat, who is the ultimate, like, all I'm at is what I'm going after.
He's also a hedonist as well, actually. He's also a hedonist, Hanna, whereas Purvis is not. So
Purvis is not, no.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting.
Well, and like, in my opinion, the villain of this movie is J. Edgar fucking Hoover. Like he's the bad guy, right? Billy Crudup is amazing, but it's like this is the guy who's like, wants to apply quant to sports and like break everything down into its like. He's the middle management asshole who like ruins everything, which is why you're nostalgic for bank robbers in this movie, and also like bank robbers have this rich history in movies.
I think what it is, the romanticism aspect is that it's what these guys are fighting for is humanity. Like, what makes us human is not that we are numbers that can be predicted via algorithms and so on, but what makes us human is that we, make choices. Those choices are expressive of our personality, who we are, the kinds of beings that we are, the individuals that we are. And Dillinger is an individual, whereas Hoover is trying to, and in fact, actually, you might think the other, in a way, villain of the film is the mafia guy who ends up turning his back on Dillinger, in part for the same reason.
John Ortiz.
Ortiz and Bill Camp's character, the two mafia guys who are like the FBI guys who want to ultimately reach this stasis where both of them, there's not really violent crime happening, but the mob's still making money and everybody's happy. But again, what it's done is it's reduced this to just a numbers game effectively. So the individual is taken out of the picture.
There's a line in this movie that I think is really kind of, it happens quickly, but it's really important, which is the mob made all this money during Prohibition, right? The mob is able to fund its operations because the government was like, no booze. And so the one, when you're a kid and you hear about this period and you watch The Untouchables, you're kind of like, oh yeah, they're the bad guys. But in reality, like in a much more nuanced, like these prohibitions, these rules, like actually create organized crime, right? Like it is the classic Batman thing. You need the yin to the yang, the good to the bad, the you complete me. Like it's kind of, and this is why I love this movie so much, because on one level, it's just like a cool cops and robbers movie with a great Depp performance. On another level, it is this exploration of what happened over the last 100
Right.
years in terms of the sort of end of the individual, right?
Well, there's
and
a
this
term
idea of
that Mann uses on the commentary, to your point, Liam, about this.
Good
About
commentary.
the idea of the rising tide of modernity and how that is a recurring theme in his subsequent pictures. He uses this term, Dillinger's caught in a Darwinian crush, which is a really, really crisp way to express this notion, because there are so many converging factors that make him so appealing, because he's kind of like the last of a dying breed, and he has a moral code and, you know, all of those things that make an outlaw more appealing on a human level. But it is an amazing, not just the story itself and the battle of wits between these two intelligent characters and the cat and mouse of it, that's compelling enough, but actually as a historical document of all of these different socio-political factors that are pressing on this guy, and how he's still able to navigate it until he can't, till ultimately, in another great Man theme, fatalism, you know, eventually subsumes him. But we're talking about this in quite a heady way, but it's also an incredibly like visceral human movie, and there's literal romance as well as sort of figurative romance there.
I like how you were like, let's talk about that romance
between him and
Billy Fichette
Cotillard character.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that romance, because it's such a Michael Mann. I was looking at Laura.
Romance.
Well, because it is.
You were looking at me for romance.
Well, it is such a Michael Mann romance, because it's basically driven by these characters who are deeply and madly in love, but also, in order for them to sustain that love, they have to escape from their current situation. I mean, it's. I think. Is there ever been a Michael Mann movie where that's not the central romance?
I mean, Last of the Mohicans might be the exception, but the idea of doomed romance is definitely true. Is definitely a factor in Thief. It's a factor in Heat. It's a factor in Miami Vice. You know, it is something that it's interesting, because we think of Mann as sometimes, I think, quite. You know, his films are both visceral and cerebral, but deep down, it's actually a romantic, and there's often a lot of erotic scenes in his films, like in Manhunter and Miami Vice, and especially, and this, you know, where you meet Vincent Hanna in an intimate moment. You know, he doesn't sort of shy away from that as being part of the human life and the experience of his characters. And I love the romance in this movie, and I love that it also very, I think, quite nimbly and tastefully incorporates and embroiders the idea of race and class into the romance through that it makes it even more appealing, because, as you were saying earlier, Liam, like, he sees beyond her social status of her time and her ethnicity, which was there was prejudicial attitudes towards people with Native American ancestry in that time, and Mann talks about that a lot on the commentary and all of the issues that surrounded that. But that also makes it, because they're both kind of outsiders. They're both kind of, you know, outside of the accepted society that a fascistic presence like J. Edgar Hoover would like the American experience to be. They live outside of that. So we root, you root for them, and you root for their love. It's really kind of pure, you know? And I mean, I'm a romantic, so I'm a sucker for that stuff, but when it's done well. And I think this is done exquisitely.
Yeah, it's done in a way, there's very little explicit time spent
Phil,
on it.
what's the line in Thief? Let's get on with this big romance. Is that what he says?
For me, it's impactful because it echoes all those other scenes from other Michael Mann films. So by recalling that, it sort of situates you as a viewer within that context, and so it just kind of brings those other scenes to mind. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Laura.
I have nothing to add except for the fact that, you know, are we going to talk about the fact that he named his penis Prince Albert or not?
I mean, okay. So that was your addition, huh? So it's just, we're talking about romance. Laura's like, all right, I'm going to get into the Dillinger.
I actually like the sort of like messy, shitty marriages part more than I like the big romances. Like, I mean, like the Vincent relationship with his wife, I find, or like the Insider, it's the same actress, right? Like the relationship he has with his wife in The Insider.
Yeah.
But like the one in Heat where it just makes me crazy, where he's just like,
Edie Brenneman and
she just like picks up her life and just follows this like crazy asshole around. It's crazy. He treats her terribly, and she's just like, okay,
but
it's nuts. And this, like, I mean, I think like oftentimes women do give it back to the men a little bit. But like, she walks, there's a man like who's like, I have to do my crimes.
I have to do my crimes,
and it's really hard to have a life end
Don't
with
try to
crime.
change me, baby.
Yeah, exactly. And she gets her moment where she walks out on him, and then he shows up, and he's like, "Don't ever do that again." And she's like, "Well, I'm not going to say that." And he's like, "Say it." And then he beats up somebody in front of her, and she's like, "All right, let's go to a derby," And then that's that. Like that's it.
But she also calls him out at the derby too. And the whole relationship is her being like, I don't know. And then him being dashing and suave and charismatic and winning her back. I mean, it is. I
think you buy that more than I do.
Fine, you might not buy it, but the point is that there is friction in the relationship is portrayed.
Yes,
to Michael
Mann's credit, he does show the friction,
and it rests on entirely the performance of Johnny Depp and whether he can win you and the lines. I mean, the lines are great. We're going to talk about the lines, but but it is she is pulling back and he is winning her over again and again.
Mm-hmm.
Can I?
Yeah.
What do you guys think of the Johnny Depp performance in this movie?
This is a great question, yes.
Because
we are split on it.
Okay, let's hear it.
Do you want to hear the con first?
So I had heard that Leonardo DiCaprio was the original choice and he pulled out to do Shutter Island. And I think that would be a vastly different performance, a much more vulnerable one. Leonardo DiCaprio, sorry. Did I say Leonardo? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you did,
sorry.
yeah.
Yes. I kind of want to, in my head, I'm wondering what that would be like. I think this one's a little flat. This performance
Yeah, the standard criticism of this performance is that it's flat.
Yeah.
I think it kind of works, honestly.
Do you think he's too old? I'm not meaning to be mean.
He is much older than John Dillinger was, yes. But
he's like 46.
Yeah. Dillinger was supposed to be like early 30s or even 20s.
Yeah, but that's fine because we expect our Michael Mann men to be like
the man men
to be grizzled and in their in their later stage of their life. They've done a lot of crime. They're tired, but they have to keep criming.
Sure.
He looks young. Like he doesn't
totally.
look John. I was actually said to my wife, like, damn, I don't, Johnny Depp persona non grata, but like,
I know,
looks pretty good.
I do wonder how much I'm like also having trouble disentangling my like feelings about Johnny Depp as a human being. And you're really looking into their soul with that digital photography. Like you're looking into his pores.
Can we talk about that, by the way?
Yeah.
We'll definitely talk about
We're going to talk about digital.
Okay.
Don't Justin's got like 16 points. He's got a whole dissertation about 360 shutter angle or whatever.
We'll get into it, but so
yeah,
we can discourse on that. But just okay. So what do you guys think about J Depp in this?
Well, first of all, I like that they have the same initials. I think
that's cool.
It's certainly not intentional, but I think it plays with that. I like the performance because I think it's just very suave. He's a very suave guy, right? And this might be the last Johnny Depp performance that I care about. I can't think of anything after that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think he's kind of a cipher for the audience, and to that extent, I think it works a little bit. But it's certainly not like he's not winning an Oscar for it. I don't think it's that kind of performance. Phil, what do you think?
I love his performance in this movie. I think Johnny Depp. I'm going to talk purely about the artist, the actor. I think he's an amazing actor, and I really love his performance in this movie. I think as a movie star, I actually see him more in this part than DiCaprio. There's something about Johnny Depp has a kind of enigmatic, slightly mythic quality to him as a person. Also, another thing that occurs to me is I believe, and I stand to be corrected, so if I'm incorrect, I apologize. I believe he has Native American ancestry himself. Is
I
that
think that's
right?
true.
Which is a part of the theme of this piece. And again, maybe on some deep level of conscious interpretation, that might be a factor. It doesn't need to be, but it doesn't hurt. I think he's great in this. I think he's particularly effective in the scene, where Billy Frechette gets ripped away from him, and he goes to pieces in the car because his love is being taken by the FBI. I think he's exceptional in that scene, but I think he has the right kind of darkly romantic, sexy vibe that this character needs to understand why someone would, to the point that you were making, Laura, like, why wouldn't you just steer clear of this guy? He has to have some kind of...
Because he looks like Johnny Depp.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it doesn't hurt, right?
So hot.
He has to have a romantic appeal to him that transcends logic. And Depp brings that. And I really like Depp when he does... he's done like a trilogy of movies that I love that are all like this, that are sort of realistic and factually based crime movies. Donnie Brasco, this, and Black Mass, which was a divisive film, but I loved it and I loved his performance in it. I like Depp when he's not doing it, when he's not in the sort of Tim Burton exaggerated land. I actually like it when he's doing naturalistic work. We talked about Nick of Time, funnily enough, on our show, which was his one shot at kind of being an action thriller everyman hero in the Die Hard vein. And it's he's kind of miscast, but he's really good.
I like him in that too.
So I like it when he's just not doing, he's just being truthful. Yeah. And I think he is a movie star.
Our friend Chris Kaiser, a past guest, calls Johnny Depp the master of unnecessary disguise. Right? I don't know
Tim Burton stuff.
Well, Tim Burton and Pirates. Let us not forget Pirates. And I don't know where we are in our Pirates. Like, has he wrapped that at this point in 2009, or is he still pirating out?
I think he's still pirating.
I don't think those are ever getting wrapped. I feel like we're going to get
the Pirates gone, but I thought
in a couple of years.
Did Jack Sparrow kind of like Orlando Bloom bailed, but I guess Jack Sparrow.
Jack Sparrow went on.
He's just getting those checks.
But let me give you some examples of lines that he just kills. I think he kills these lines. These are tough lines to deliver.
I was raised on a farm in Mooresville, Indiana. My mama died when I was 3. My daddy beat the hell out of me because he didn't know no better way to raise me. I like baseball, movies, good clothes, fast cars, whiskey, and you. What else you need to know?
That is such a direct line. And it's basically just like him turning to camera and being like, I'm sexually attracted to this woman, and how do you do that? Like, and he does it in a way that I think is really compelling. The other one I think that is amazing. These are, again, all lines where...
Do you hear the Miami Vice line in that, by the way? My mama knows my name. Or
maybe
my
a little bit, but I think but they're all the lines that I think work are the ones where he's trying to convince Billy. And the other one is...
You ain't going nowhere. You hear me? I'm gonna die an old man in your arms. We're too good for them. They ain't tough enough, smart enough, or fast enough. I hit any bank I want anytime. They got to be at every bank. All the time. That's why we're on top of the world. Ain't nobody lay a glove on us. No. I ain't going nowhere. Neither are you. What do you got to say about that?
It's also like ludicrous because like when he's like, I'm gonna die an old man in your arms, and like,
yeah, but
he was in jail for 9 years and he's been out for like 9 months maybe at this point. But he's like, no, I'll never get caught again.
That swagger.
Yeah.
And that is, again, what's partly appealing to him about him to the public is that it's this guy. And again, it goes back to Trump and stuff. The sort of pure swagger of someone who, in the face of all the evidence to the contrary, is like, no, I'm still going to win. There's something appealing. There's like something, deeply appealing about that because you're like, well, I would follow this guy to hell.
I don't want to get too heady here, even though this is a podcast about philosophy and movies, but I feel like that line where he's like, I like baseball, movies, good clothes, fast cars, whiskey, and you is like kind of pivotal to understanding this movie because
Mhm.
it's so like he's so sophisticated. Like there's a sophistication, even it's such a clean line, but like when you think about the fact that like people are going to the movies for the first time regularly, they're thinking about brands. Like whiskey is not just this like, a few years before in Prohibition, it's just this thing that you buy moonshine of. But this guy has taste, he has class, he
Yeah.
has sort of a mentality outside of himself. And what I think is he has this consciousness of the world, right? And that feels really modern. And I think that, there's the scene where he and Marion Cotillard are making love. I almost said doing it. I said making love. I decided to be sophisticated about it. But she starts talking about how she was raised with her family and like they did these plays and it was kind of this like fun, and this is little light. This she didn't have a lot of money, but she spent time with her family. And it feels like that line in contrast with like, I like movies. I like to go to the movies. Like it feels like we're encountering two eras of American life. There's like the pre-media life and the present tense. And I think it's just, this movie is all about like the innovations of the 20th century. They talk about V8 engines. They clean Tommy guns. They
Yep.
do all this stuff that like man is presenting this moment. Again, to come back to the idea of here and there. Everybody talks about being from there. I'm talking about where I'm going, right? Like he is the modern man. He's the modern man
he's
that
very
everyone
interested in with Mann's films is like his main characters. He calls it like his the navigation system, which can be distilled into that credo or some sort of philosophy. Like the character in Thief, James Caan's character has that sort of vision board, that was built in prison. That he has he has very, very functional guidelines, tenets for his life. Macaulay has his belief system. You don't do anything. You don't get attached to anything if you feel the heat around the corner. That's his sort of navigation.
Jamie
system.
Foxx has the picture of the
exactly
the tropical
he's
island.
really interested in taking the complexity of a life and distilling it into something kind of expressible in a bite-sized way. By the way, that speech, I think, if you were to add like tequila and football into that speech, that's like my philosophy as well.
but that's
like, what a great! It's a cool philosophy. It's cool, and it's like, yeah, what more do you need?
Well, you're just not
something
that
to be
far
said
away
for
from like people living on farm. Like the whole idea of people moving to cities and like, well, I got to get the fuck away from growing up on the farm or whatever it is, right? Like the whole idea of that, it's such a 20th century, at least in America, idea, right? Like we're moving to cities, we're centralizing things, we're going to the movies. Like he's a man kind of like living ahead of his time, right? And the consciousness to be able to say the things that he says there, I think is really, really fascinating. And I think the way that he gets caught, I joked to Phil that this movie is a movie about men who are good at their jobs but bad at networking. Like he can't integrate into like being a part of modern gangsterdom in the same way that Purvis, it goes too far for him. It's significant that Purvis's postscript, he died by his own hand in 1960, because if you read about that, he didn't necessarily commit suicide. It's believed to have been an accident.
Oh.
But it's unclear. But my belief watching the movie is that this is a guy who's haunted by the fact that he let things go too far, right?
It's empty, isn't it? It doesn't fill. Vincent Hanna. I know we keep referencing other movies, but I think they're all in a kind of metatextual conversation. Mm-hmm. Hanna is driven by the hunt. Al Pacino's character in Heat, the idea of hunting high-level prey is the elevated experience of his life. And there's an adrenaline rush that gets him off, that does fill. He might be an empty vessel outside of that because he struggles with all these other facets of his life. But the pursuit does give him something. That is his raison d'etre to some extent. Purvis is completely empty. Even with that, the pursuit does nothing for him. I don't think. When he takes out Babyface Nelson in a pretty ruthless way, which is sort of revenge for his friend played by Rory Cochrane, the other agent that gets killed. He's channeling his anger into his the direct nature of taking down Babyface Nelson, but you don't feel that it like got him off. It almost feels very like, I don't know any different, and the system is telling me what to do, and I have the skills to do it. But yet he also has this somewhat of the knowledge. When he says in the scene with J. Edgar Hoover, where he says, our type cannot get the job done, and they have to bring in the badasses
Yeah.
from the Oklahoma, Texas
Stephen Lang,
Rangers.
holy shit.
Can we talk about him yet? Because
Well, can I just piggyback off something that
you're
you just
making
said,
me
Phil,
holster
which
it.
is
Okay.
it feels like holster that. The central idea of this movie or every man movie is like, what does it mean to be alive? Like, I think that's what he's actually making movies about. And like, for him, the idea of being alive is not fucking barbecues and baseball games. It's like chasing down the thing that you love. You know, there was this story that got reported that during the strikes here, like he would drive onto the lot every day and people would be like, what an asshole. But now, to be clear, Michael Mann was not on strike. That's the first thing. But the second thing is he was finishing Ferrari, right? And the idea of this guy who's like, I got to show up to work. I'm 80 years old, but I have to finish my movie. I have to continue to work. Like, that is a Michael Mann character who just, pulls into the studio lot and is like, I'm going to do my thing. Like, you see that manifest in his characters because all of his characters are kind of like, what does it mean to be alive? One of the great things about Collateral, it's Die Hard in a Taxi Cab, is that Tom Cruise is right about Jamie Foxx. He's like, you're not living. Your life is on hiatus because you've got to get it organized. You got to get it together. It's like such a Michael Mann. It's such a Michael Mann thing for a killer to be telling you like you're not living correctly, and is weirdly like perverse because that's ultimately, I think, the great theme is what does it mean to be alive, and it doesn't mean to just like spend time with your family. It
Isn't
means
there a line in one of his films where he talks about like you've been Diane Venora, I think, says to Pacino, you've been walking through our life dead. You've been walking through our life dead. I think you live
among
right.
the corpses of of the victims that you. Yeah, totally.
It is all his films. You're right, are all about characters trying to connect. It's a very existential theme. What is their version of being alive? And some characters haven't been able to sort of tap into that manner, and it might be dark, like Vincent in Collateral, or Macaulay in Heat, or Dillinger,
or Wygand in The Insider has to tell the truth.
They have to feel alive and not just a sort of automaton drifting through the life that was prescribed for us and told, hey, you do this and you follow these rules, and then at the end you just shuffle off this mortal coil, an empty vessel and into the unknown.
It makes me think a little bit about this is so random, but the speed line. You know what a bomb is that doesn't go off? Right. It's a watch. Right? Like, it's this idea of like people who live for something or just live. And I think Michael Mann's movie is about people who are like, I have to live for something ahead of
to bring
else.
It to the existentialist thing, because you guys have mentioned that, and that Mann has talked about his films through the existentialist lens. And actually, he's talked about them in a quite sophisticated way.
It's a very smart philosophical minded.
For sure. He definitely is like thoughtful about how he constructs these films and what he's putting in them. But the bit about existentialism that, as it relates to what you guys are talking about, is one dimension of at least Sartre's version of existentialism is the notion of bad faith. It's central to Sartre's philosophy, which is the idea that when you act in bad faith, you act in a way that's lying to yourself about your reasons for acting. So the person who acts in bad faith says, I'm doing it because, and then fill in the blank, anything that's other than because I chose it. So it'll be like, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, or I'm doing it because it's my job, or I'm doing it because this guy's bad and I need to catch him, or something like that. All those are instances of bad faith. The only reason you actually ever act is just because you chose. That's the only ever reason. And in choosing, you ultimately will commit yourself to something which in retrospect will be, a code, but you don't act on the code. You create the code through your actions. This is like a central dimension of Sartre's philosophy, which I think is core in a lot of Mann's films and that you guys are bringing out here. Dillinger, in a way, is a true existentialist when he, an existentialist hero, when he says, like, I'm not thinking about the future. I'm just doing what I do.
We're having too good of a time right now.
Yeah, I'm just making these choices. It's not that I'm like, that I have some master plan. And I mean, in the end, he wants to escape and so on. But like, those are, again, choices that he makes. Whereas Purvis, by contrast, is the ultimate cog. Right, he's someone who's acting ultimately in bad faith. He's just doing this, as far as we can tell, because J. Edgar has told him, and he, desires to rise the ranks.
It's so interesting because Dillinger is so connected to the present. He intentionally and vocally expunges the idea of the past in the relation. I don't like with the line that you've said. My past is irrelevant, and so is yours. He has a vague notion of what the future may be, but it doesn't feel particularly well defined. It's Brazil, He is totally invested in the present, which is really interesting, and something that in our society we're constantly told we should be doing is actually the key to mental health.
Yes.
Is to be present. We're constantly hearing that,
breathing.
right? Dillinger is the ultimate embodiment of that notion in a kind of in that dark fantasy, in that societally unacceptable way, but nonetheless, he takes pleasure in baseball, movies, whiskey, fine clothes, all of that stuff, and he's authentically connected to his present intake.
As we keep talking again and again and again about the movies, right? Like the other movies, like one of my favorite, and Justin, I feel like this is something that I've always wanted to talk to you about, which is the scene in Black Hat when they go into Hathaway's cell. He has the Baudrillard book, he has Foucault's Discipline and Punish, he has all these like 20th century philosophical texts. And very nerdily, I wrote them all down, and I was like, I gotta check these out, but I think that like the other person that it feels like he probably thinks about a lot is Foucault and the 20th century and what happened over the course of the 20th century to increasingly like put people into positions where they are watching each other, where they are defined by the security state, by the apparatus, by the idea that like we can cross borders and arrest people now. Like this movie is about the birth of the FBI in a very roundabout way, right? And so from that perspective, Dillinger is a hero because he's like, I'm going to rebel against the idea of the world becoming smaller and smaller and smaller and contained. Like, I like that this movie, beyond the history of it, takes place like in Chicago and the larger Midwest, because you think about the expanse of that, how much I've spent so little time in the middle of this country, but the expanse of it is so compelling, and the freedom in every Michael Mann movie has a character gazing out into the distance, right? This one, I can't remember that it does, but I think something that he's clearly obsessed with is like, look at what happened in the 20th century in terms of law enforcement, in terms of the growth of these things. And this guy is rebelling against that in his way by being let's think about right now, right? It's actually like sort of a choice that he makes to try to rebel against the systems that are increasingly putting people into narrow lanes of existence.
I also think there's just a point I wanted to make, if I may, just very briefly, about the time in which this came out. It is war on terror, and this is war on crime, right? I don't think it's an accident that this film was made in 2000, around that time when these were things that we were all kind of thinking about, and the rise of the surveillance state to some extent. That this was the origin of that culture, and J. Edgar Hoover famously had dirt on everybody, regardless of whether they were criminals or not. So I think that's also just important to place it in its cultural context. Is another sort of it enhances the reading of the film just that one little bit more.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because we just did our episode on The Rock, which I think will come out right before this comes out, or around the same time. And there's this whole idea that like there's a line about that in the movie. J. Edgar Hoover had dirt on everybody, and he had it on a microfilm, and it's like kind of absurd because it's a 1996 action movie, but like it's true. Right? Like, that's who J. Edgar Hoover was.
I think some of the most visually dynamic and beautiful scenes in this movie kind of have to like often like are around some technology, like the first commercial plane that we see, then the 1929 plane that we see with the flare, or the way that the Tommy guns, the automatic guns that people have are like exploding in the air. But also I think those surveillance rooms are beautiful. The wiretap rooms those are some gorgeous scenes. But you do know like how bad it's going to go. Like Hoover has this technology. The FBI started it with the bootlegging, and like you know that like this is gonna like he's going to use it to try to undermine the civil rights movement very soon, So it's like, we're like, I got my like hackles up as soon as you see that scene where they're listening in on people's conversations. In terms of like the cultural moment of it being 2009, it's also kind of funny. Like I thought about this when he couldn't have known this because I think they started principal filming in like March 2008. But this movie also comes on right out like on the financial crisis as well. And, so Dillinger being a hero, everybody hates the banks. We're back to, in 2009, we're back to hating the banks.
Now we all love banks. It's
Yay,
all good. We're all really into banks.
Yeah, interest rates.
Also, burn it all down. To that point, the Bale of it, the Christian Bale playing this part at this moment when he's just on The Dark Knight, where like, I have to mention Nolan. I'm contractually obligated in every podcast I do to talk about
Well, I also like there's so much Nolan man shared DNA
Juice.
and they're borrowing each other's actors at this point too.
and I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it's really interesting that like the sort of the cog in the machine plays the Cape Crusader in the other movie, right? Like it feels very smart, even if it's not really what he's intending at all. Like it has a metatextual read that's endlessly compelling.
The other thing I think that's important to mention about this film, and because we've mentioned it before, but I want to just return to it because I think it kind of got tabled, is that this film is interested in the image of John Dillinger in as much as it's interested in John Dillinger. And a couple examples of this. So one, of course, the clearest example is that he then he dies after leaving a theater, and in the theater, he's watching a representation of, a criminal, and we're seeing this kind of reflection. But moreover, I think the film is happy to take liberties with its portrayal of Dillinger. So I think actually, from what I know from my minimal research I did on John Dillinger, he was actually kind of like an asshole. Like, he was a hooligan. Like he was a wayward youth who was raised in a basically middle-class household. So he didn't come from poverty, but he was just a kid. He was a bully. He was constantly getting in trouble, and he turned to life of crime, partly because probably he was sociopathic in some regard. Like probably he was actually couldn't exist in society as it was. Like it wasn't a choice. But, seemingly this guy was just a bad egg, not a dumb egg, or right, a bad
dumb egg.
Yeah, bad egg. And but the film romanticizes him and makes him out to be this great, like, savior, resistance figure in a way to the encroaching modernity and so on. But I think that's on purpose, because it's reflecting back the public's image of John Dillinger, the broader public's image of John Dillinger, in putting it in this sort of cinematic language. And I think that is very, and of course reflecting it back metatextually through the rest of Michael Mann's filmography, as we've been talking about. And I think that's really smart and interesting, and much more interesting than if it had been a more, in some ways realistic depiction of Dillinger, or one that's more true to the facts.
Would this be a good moment to talk about the digital photography?
Well,
I feel like that is a major piece of...
So let me ask you guys this. What did you think? I mean, I have a feeling you're going to say what you're going to say, but I want to know, what did you think of the digital cinematography, which is now at this point, Mann is fully in his digital space. There's not a 35 millimeter camera to be found, I think. So what do you guys think of the digital cinematography?
It's my favorite aspect of the film, and I think it's the point.
Guy.
It's the point of the film. It's not just a stylistic choice. It is to create our generation. We don't know anybody that lived this era, so we've only, because we're all too old, right? Yeah. By this point, pretty much, right? So we've only ever experienced the notion of the 30s through this soft lensed film, right? The look of film. Whereas what Mann is trying to say is, hey, this wasn't like something that happened in the past. This was their immediate visceral reality. And by shooting it in this style, it forces you to experience these events as if they are contemporaneous, right? That it's not something like The Untouchables, which is an amazing movie, but is a complete act of myth making intentionally, right? That's not a critique. I love that movie. I think it's perfect. But it takes huge liberties with the facts, and it's about the myth of Elliot Ness. It's not supposed to be like, or this is, it's doing something different around the same era and around some of the same themes. And of course, it's from the other perspective. This is something very different. And I think that's what sort of really has frustrated me at the time, was that people couldn't get past that because they were so, but the aesthetic is the juice. The aesthetic is the point, So that's where I'm
gonna buy that website right now. Theaestheticisthejuice.com for Phil for his book for later.
You need it on a t-shirt. Die hard on a blank. The aesthetic is the juice. Do it now.
First of all, I like that you're both wearing Cows in the Field t-shirts. Phil, we have to do that.
We're just desperate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could say it better. I think you hit it on the head. Yeah, I mean, I think it places the film in a present tense that it doesn't have the literal gaze of nostalgia, right? And I think also beyond that, you go back and you watch the Godfather, which is like the primo, gangster film of ever made, right? And it now looking at it, the 35 millimeter film stock, it's a beautiful looking movie, but it looks like film, right? It looks like it was made a long time ago, which I actually think the thing that I really appreciate is kind of like, roll your eyes at this, but like it's ballsy for Mann to be like, I'm going to take the central idea of this movie and film it in such a way that idea is reinforced, right? Which is the idea that like, this is a movie about modernity, and I'm going to use the ultimate source of like, in the present moment of what is modern, which is these digital cameras that have, the 180 degree shutter. And if you watch the special features on the Blu-ray, there's this amazing shot that gave me goosebumps because I was just kind of starting a film career in 2008 when this was shot, and the Canon XL2, which was this like tiny, or the shoulder mounted $3,000 camera that like was so fun to shoot with. It looked amazing. And there's a BTS shot of them pulling away from one of the heists, and the cameraman has a Canon XL2. He has a $3,000 camera on his shoulder. And on some level, it's like, wow, there's a $3,000 camera being used for some of the second unit footage in a Michael Mann movie made in 2009. And he doesn't shy away from it.
Yeah.
Like it's a sign of his sort of a desire. Like he's past his he's made his quote unquote masterpiece, right? He's made Heat. Now he's kind of fucking around. And as a result, he does this thing that nobody else is doing in terms of cinematography. There's like a bunch of writing about this, but I'm just so impressed by the fact that he uses the visual language of the movie to reinforce the central idea, which is like the 20th century is always changing. Everything is moving forward all the time. And like we are caught in the thread of history.
It's the idea that it was never... It's always the present. It was never the past. This film's about immediacy. It's about the immediacy of Dillinger's like philosophy towards life, and by shooting it with that style and removing in a way the filter, that positions something as false or fiction, but with that softer the softer look of traditional film. It's like that. It's like it's the whole point is that it was done in this way. It all is completely creatively congruent, in my opinion.
I also wonder if some of it is, on another level, is a commentary on these movies, right? This movie is called Public Enemies. There are a history of movies called Public Enemies. Public Enemies is a term that originates from the 1930s, right? It is not... He is in dialogue with every gangster film that's been made before it. And so to watch it in this pristine... unreal reel that is digital cinematography at this moment, because the camera's like, Lynch shoots Inland Empire around this time, right? And he's not, how do I put it? It's like he's commenting on all these things before, and you as an audience member, like even watching it the other night on my TV, I was like, this looks weird. Like I was sort of like, in the way when we talked about Starship Troopers before, there's almost this like distancing effect that happens during those scenes that kind of like, when the machine guns go off, they look otherworldly. And on some level, like maybe I'm reading too much into this, but is he commenting on the verisimilitude in gangster movies with the decision to shoot it with this digital photography that looks different from any other gangster picture that's come before it?
I mean, I like that idea that like it's a way of distinguishing it, but then also everything you said Phil is right, I think, about the verisimilitude bit. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think here's one thought about why this film, I think, has aged better than you might have thought. So it's the same for Miami Vice. I mean, Miami Vice and this film and Black Hat, were shot on, but really those two films were shot on early digital cameras that now your iPhone can basically shoot better footage. If you have an iPhone 15, you can shoot better quality footage than those cameras could get. And so what those cameras are doing is, I think at the time, people reacted negatively to it, in part because people were worried. They were like, is this what movies are going to start? Like, this looks like garbage compared to film.
It's not pretty. I kind of wanted it to be prettier.
It looks
Sorry.
I mean, of course, it looks uncanny in a way. Let me put it this way. I'm quoting other people when I say this. I think it looks awesome. But other people thought
I wish it was
looked
prettier.
ugly. And I'll get into why I think why it does look, I mean, quote unquote ugly. But then the cameras got better. And, obviously now an ARRI Alexa large format camera is, infinitely better than that in terms of course, what's better at is two things. So one, the sensor size is larger. So these cameras are using very small sensor sizes. And he actually liked that in part because it could create a bigger depth of field. And he makes good use of that actually in the courtroom scene. Because you really see all of the, he's got this shot of I forgot the guy's name. He's the guy from The Wire.
Peter Garrity.
Yeah. And then you see everyone behind him, like rows and rows of people, and they're all in focus. That's partly achievable because you have a smaller sensor size, so it's behaving like 16 millimeter. Of course, with that smaller sensor size, you get what's known as reduced dynamic range. So the amount of stops of between total darkness and total light is reduced. So it becomes chunkier and blockier. And that's where you get this sort of, the highlights tend to get blown out really fast. So you get like pure white, and then there's nothing you can recover from that. You just like lose all the information. And that's what gets us this feel. That's part of what gets us the feel of like home video look, is because it's just lacking dynamic range. The digital cameras now can basically get the same dynamic range as film, which is why they look like film now. And I think because of that, now when we look back on this film, it's such an outlier because cameras don't look like this anymore. We've replaced them. So there's only a few films that were made using this kind of digital technology. We saw one recently, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. Is that the one?
Sidney Lumet
the Lumet
movie,
one, which is also shot digitally and looks funky in that way because it's using that kind of early digital. But this and Miami Vice, and Collateral too, actually, they're all pushing the limits of these cameras because they're like, what the fuck, let's try it out. Let's see what we can get away with. And so you get that like hyper grain look and all that stuff. And they're trying to shoot in pitch black darkness because they're playing with the sensor and things you can't do with film. And all of that, I think, contributes to the kind of quote unquote ugliness. But because nobody really picked up on that, now, when we look back on it from 2024, we're like, this looks fucking cool as shit because it looks like nothing else. No other feature films look like this because it looks kind of like a home video, but whose home video has Johnny Depp on the other side of the camera and the production design and like a 1950s or whatever, 1930s car. And the best shot, the best version of this, I think, is when they get off the plane and they've got the flare stuff with lighting it. And
incredible.
And then Mann does the brilliant thing of cutting between the film footage that the guys, probably they just shot film footage on there, and then cutting between that and the digital. And with the digital, you see everything in the darkness, and then the light is blown out. And on the film footage, you see the opposite. You see barely what the light shows you, and the darkness is black because the film can't pick up any of that blackness. And I think there is, by kind of cutting that contrast back and forth between those two things, he's reminding us in part why he's doing this. The digital looks much more immediate, much more like as if you were there filming it with your iPhone or whatever. And that, talking to your point, Phil, and the film, when he cuts to the film stock, Now you have that huge distance. You're like, oh, that looks old. And because cuts back and forth between those, it's amazing.
It's a barrier. So you check out when you see that, because you're like, oh, this is something that happened to a bunch of people in the past that I can't connect with. Versus this is happening now in the contemporaneous moment. And these are human beings that are like fragile and living their life as best they can in the present moment. It's like that. It just drives me crazy that it's like that was the whole point. And yet the inverse happened, was that became a barrier. The intention was to remove the barrier, to do something unique about a gangster story set in this period. The shot that I loved the most, just for the record, is when Depp is in the movie theater, and there's the newsreel that's saying, he could be among you now, and there's a low angle
going
shot
up and the light comes on,
where you see Depp, exactly, and like that shot is like amazing. And if you were to just look at that one frame, I mean, that's a frame you could have on your wall. It's so beautiful, but it's also kind of encompassing almost all of the themes are condensed and pressed and squeezed into that one image, because it's him in a theater. It's him hiding in the dark, hiding in plain sight, surrounded by all these people, yet alone, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it's like it was genius, and it's sort of frustrating that the directorial and aesthetic visual approach was not the intention behind it was not understood or embraced. But for me, that's like one of the whole point of the entire experience.
Directors talk a lot about like reinforcing the idea of their movie visually with a shot or a framing tool, like characters at a distance represents the distance between them, right? And Mann does two things that I think are really exciting. One, the sort of juxtaposition of film against digital does reinforce that idea of everybody's looking at where they come from. I'm looking at where we are now or where we're going, right? It's literally a reinforcement of that idea.
Yep.
But also, if you pay attention to intimate scenes in Michael Mann movies, the first thing that comes to mind is actually the scene in Black Hat when Chris Hemsworth and the actress whose name I forget are sitting in the sushi bar in LA waiting, to catch this guy. It cuts between them and they're talking about it. And as they do, the camera, the lens gets longer and longer. So the effect is that at the beginning of the scene, they're over the shoulder, but you have, one of them in the foreground, the other in the background. And because the lens gets longer and gets further away, it compresses them, it pancakes them. So they look like they're closer together. Also happens in the Vincent Hanna De Niro scene in Heat. He uses a longer lens as it feels like it gets closer and closer. And so there's a very small percentage of directors who are that good at reinforcing the central ideas of their movies through the like apparatus of how they film things. The like most obvious example is I think of Lars von Trier making Dogville and being like, I'm going to get rid of the sets. I'm just going to make like this thing on a soundstage, right? Because he's operating at this level where it's like the visual, not just the visuals, but the technology used in the film reinforces the ideas of them that are in play at the movie, which is characters caught in history. And there's the history of glossy, nostalgic 35 versus the immediacy of a $3,000 or really $100,000 camera with a 180-degree shutter speed capturing the rat-tat-tat of machine guns in a way that no one has ever seen before.
Yes, let's get to that. Actually, it's 360-degree shutter. But,
right.
But no worries. We don't need to go into the physics or whatever of 360-degree shutter. But that was the thing I wanted to talk about, which is those shootouts. So, okay.
Amazing.
I really think the shootouts, especially the one at that lodge, is really, really fucking awesome and really underrated as far as shootouts go. Like when people talk about great shootouts, of course, Heat is in the mix. And, probably a lot of movies you guys have talked about are going to be in the mix. But Heat's shootout...
the champion. Heat's the greatest.
Heat is for sure.
The greatest.
But this shootout, I think, is right up there for me. I mean, this is in some ways more intense than the Heat one. And here, one of the reasons I think it is because of the digital cinematography. I mean, the thing about 360-degree shutter is what it allows you to do is get a little bit more natural. It won't seem natural because we're used to 35. Balloons are flying over my screen. But
Justin, what zoom do you have?
it's the Mac just demands that we do this. But if I give thumbs up, it does balloons.
Man,
if I give thumbs
these
down,
philosopher
it rains.
types get all this cool stuff.
But what it does is it creates motion blur, which is a bit more natural to the eye, but not the kind of motion blur that's natural when we think of when we want to watch film. But what it allows them to do is shoot in these super dark, and then when the guns shoot, they bloom out. They're like totally overexposed gunfire. And the other thing that he's doing is the sound design with this. And every time a bullet hits some different object, wood, and it's just thunk, or metal and it's ricocheting off, it's so loud. And it's the bullets ricocheting that are, I think, more intense in these gunfights than in the Heat one. And then there's at one point a guy gets hit in the leg. One of the FBI guys gets hit in the leg. And because you've been hearing bullets just rip apart glass and metal and wood, when that guy gets hit and he's like, it hurts way more. I'm just like, oh my God, that feels so much more painful because I've just been listening to bullets destroy, things that are much stronger than human flesh. The guys move, maybe it's unrealistic. The guys move in the shootout like they move in Heat. Like they move like tactical dudes, like the way they're moving the Tommy guns and stuff. And I just think it's fucking awesome. I think it's really, what a really wonderful shootout.
So famously, Heat, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when we talked about it, one of the things that was interesting is that they use the production sound for the gunfire.
Yes, they use the production sound, and they do that here too.
That's what I thought. Okay, yeah. And the squibs and the cars, they pre-shot up all the cars and then layered them out and then put squibs on top of them.
It's important to say as well, when you see this, I saw Heat when it came out, and I saw it again at a retrospective like a few years ago. And when you see Heat, when you experience it at the theater, it is deafening. In that shootout, which is how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to shake your body because guns are supposed to be frightening. They're not supposed to be something that's like, hey, this is cool. It's like, no, these are terrifying instruments of death that, as you just said, can can rip through human flesh. It's a frightening, visceral experience to be around them. And that, I think, again, is like Mann's intention to, it's so crazy because there is this paradox of how he's so obsessed with aestheticizing things and stylizing things, but at the same time, it also wants to bring you into its absolute reality. And the two things paradoxically can kind of coexist. And I think, his approach to these shootouts is like, no, this is supposed to shake you up and be frightening, which is how it would be for the characters to experience it. The other big difference is, as opposed to the Heat shootout, it's in the dark. Right, so it's a different tactical situation, which makes it even more confusing and more frightening as well. But can I talk about Stephen Lang?
Let's go
right now.
I mean, Stephen Lang plays a big part in these shootouts.
He's the hero of the movie.
Well, yeah, because he does like a little. He does a flip. He is the hero of the movie. That was one of my big takeaways. It's interesting you bring this up because when I saw this when it came out as well, because I'm deep down the Michael Mann rabbit hole. I have been for since I can remember. So of course I saw this when it came out, and two of my big takeaways were I remembering that scene, the sort of shootout by the lodge, and Stephen Lang's performance, because he's been an actor who I've tracked with interest for a long time going back. The first time I ever saw him anything was The Hard Way, which he plays a character called the Party Crasher.
I love The Hard Way,
who's
Phil.
like a
Have we talked? It's amazing.
And it's an amazing... it's an amazing movie. But Stephen Lang, and he also has a long relationship with Mann, and he's in Manhunter as Freddie Lowndes, the Scorsese investigative journalist, and he was also in some of the TV
Avatar
stuff.
too.
He had a big part in Crime Story and whatever. So they go way back. Of course, coming to, that's the one that he's most known for. My point about this is Stephen Lang has always been very big, in these parts. And this is a kind of a rarity in the sense of the theatricality of his performance. And he's a very interesting figure in theater, in New York theater, as you probably know, quite an avant-garde, theatrical presence, and has won all kinds of awards and done incredible stage work throughout his career. But this is such a departure from a lot of the Avatar character, which he's most closely associated with. Very big, broad performance, tonally commensurate with that film, right? But this is what he is so subtle in this film. And I love his character in this so much because, there's all little details about like how he treats women, how he treats people of color, like in the scene in the train station when they arrive. He treats everybody with dignity and respect. He also understands the sort of the bureaucracy of the situation, because he repeatedly will tell Christian Bale's character Melvin Purvis in a respectful way. At one point, I think he literally says to him, "Mr. Purvis, this is not how it should be done." He will give like his opinion, but he always does it in a respectful way, and he's able to navigate this whole crazy situation that is so volatile without losing his own sense of self and his own kind of moral coding, and then but ultimately gets the job done, which is quite a dark, grisly job, but it's like that's the job that did need to be done, to ultimately shoot Dillinger in quite a brutal way. But yet he still had the compassion to then go and talk to Billy Frechette and perhaps give her closure, and to treat her with respect and dignity, and say the two things: my humanity does not, I can still be a human being whilst being an avid hunter and which is the job that I've been tasked to do to get Dillinger. And I just think it's an amazing performance by an incredible actor. And he's actually, we have something called the Exceptional Thief Award on Die Hard on a Plank, and it would
Hans Gruber
for
Exceptional
like
Thief
the
Award
most
for stealing the film.
scene-stealing poorer. And it would, for me, that's
great.
It would be Stephen Lang as Agent Winstead.
Well, I also think something that you might be saying is he is the only figure that lives realistically in the 20th century, or lives like a life that makes sense, because Dillinger, better to burn out than to fade away, right? Like he lives so hard that he gets killed. You could say that Purvis in the movie sacrifices some amount of his humanity to do the job that he's hired to do. So he becomes the cog in the machine, and Stephen Lang somehow manages to play the role, but also like earn some kind of humanity by facing Billy Frechette at the end of the movie.
Yeah. It's telling too that that's the final scene of the film.
Absolutely.
I mean, it reminds me a little bit of I feel like Mann likes to have these little codas almost to his films, and like at the end of Miami Vice is just Crockett walking back towards the hospital where Trudy is shot up, and I think there's these. Again, it's like this, like now this is something maybe we have to find some way of reconnecting as human beings in the end, after all of this mayhem and after all of the loss that we face. Like this is maybe all what we have left is just each other.
Holding the hands, Hannah and Macaulay
holding the hands. Yes, exactly. Totally. So who would you give the Exceptional Thief Award to, Liam?
I can't give it to Stephen Lang because Phil already did.
Yeah. Got to be someone else besides. And then Laura, I'm just coming to you next.
Okay, you know who I'm going to give it to.
First of all, trademark. No, I'm kidding.
Billy Frechette. Laura has it out for Marion Cotillard.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Did her 9/11 beliefs? Okay, I'm gonna give it to.
Oh, the scene stealer. That's the thing. Well, here's another thing. There's a lot of amazing actors in completely like meaningless roles in this film. I'm not sure if that qualifies.
My pick, I was gonna go with Stephen Graham as Babyface Nelson, but I'm not going to. I'm gonna give it to Anna, the actress who ultimately sets Dillinger up, because she's got like 4 minutes of screen time, and like when they're in that movie theater and she's looking around suspiciously, she provides so much of the tension in that moment. Because kind of sadly, Dillinger's just like at the movies having a good time watching, Manhattan, whatever the name of the melodrama, right? But yeah, that would be my pick.
Lars' pick is Babyface.
Yeah, it's obviously Babyface. He's having the most fun in this movie. He's
The way that guy eats steak.
You dumb eggs. I also just like when he like jumps up when they do the robbery together, and he jumps up on the counter and he's just like, yeah, I'm robbing banks, and they have like a cut over to Dillinger, and Dillinger's just like, fucking
Everybody
hate
has
that guy.
the
Like he just it's just like a
coworker.
look.
I would nominate him for our other category, which is the Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the movie, because he
Yeah.
sucks. And they're all like, I love the look with the Spencer Garrett gives him during the robbery. Is that what's his character? It's called Tommy Carroll, who's like the other guy that's like the intermediary who gets Dillinger in with the baby, and he kind of gives him a look as he's holding the gun, like this guy.
This fucking guy.
Jason
Yeah.
Clarke also fucking incredible in this movie.
Jason Clarke
Has he
is
ever
great in
not
this,
been
too.
phenomenal?
Guys,
like
I
unreal.
can't handle when I hear him speak with an Australian accent, because I'm like, that guy is like from the Midwest. Like he just,
By the way,
blows my mind.
I had an out of body moment where it was like, is that Carey Mulligan?
It is Carey Mulligan.
Did you
Yeah.
remember? And it is.
It is Carey Mulligan. I know.
Wild.
Okay, here's a funny thing. So, if I told you here's a movie coming out tomorrow, it stars Channing Tatum, Carey Mulligan, Giovanni Ribisi, Lily Taylor, Lily Sobieski, and Bill Camp, you'd be like, awesome, that sounds really fun. It turns out all of them have like 3 lines in
Forgot
this movie.
about Lily, of course.
Yeah.
Well, this is
The matron jail owner.
Yeah.
I used to see Bill Camp at the theater probably pretty close to you guys, the American Repertory Theater, all the time. He used to do shows there. Like I saw him in a play called Ollie's Prison, which he has a 45-minute monologue at the top of the show. I saw him in a bunch of stuff because he used to be there all the time. And now to see him like in Queen's Gambit, in like every goddamn movie that comes out, I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Bill Camp, he's amazing.
Nitti is an important figure as well in all of this, right? He was Capone's guy. You never actually, I don't think Capone is ever maybe mentioned,
right.
But through Nitti's presence, Nitti is a big figure played by Billy Drago in The Untouchables.
Phil, what's
he's
the
guy
line?
that Costner throws off the roof.
I said he died like
"Did
a
he sound
stuck
anything
Irish
like that?"
pig. Yeah, that bit.
He's an important figure in gangster mythology and actual historical fact. He's also in, I think Stanley Tucci plays him in Road to Perdition. I could be wrong on that, but he's an important figure, in this milieu.
Well, speaking of important figures, you guys are important figures in the
Oh my
podcast space.
goodness.
The podcast is Die Hard on a Blank. Tell us a bit about the podcast. I mean, you've promoted it on our show before, but in case people haven't listened to the Starship Troopers episode, which they should, maybe we could get Phil's promotion.
He's better
of the
at it
show.
than me.
Tell us, yeah.
Yeah, so that term "Die Hard on a Blank" is cultural shorthand for any film that utilizes this very particular storytelling paradigm, which is broadly bad guys take over a blank bus, boat, train,
Ice cream
plane,
truck.
what have you. Ice cream truck, and it's up to one guy
Alcatraz.
or gal or group of folks to think. Another facet of Die Hard on a Blank is that Liam constantly interrupts me. So you're getting a little taste of that as I try to explain what our podcast is. But basically, that was the initial thesis of it, was to track chronologically from Die Hard, as if like Die Hard is the big bang, and then we track all of the stuff that kind of comes out of it throughout action cinema, but it's not all the stuff that it is all the stuff that you would expect and love, like Under Siege and Passenger 57 and The Rock, and films that utilize that storytelling concept. But it's also films you might be surprised by, like Ricochet, for example, which is connected to Die Hard by the presence of a peripheral character. Other films that it touches on, or the films that John McTiernan made, like Hunt for Red October. It's ended up being quite a broad canvas of films that have some kind of Die Hard DNA, as we call it, that all trace back to it. So I was really interested in doing this as a kind of historical project to really do the definitive account of Die Hard's influence, one action movie at a time. And we've had some incredible guests on the show, including hopefully your good selves very soon. We have one lined up for you. A film that I recently said on X was better than Citizen Kane, and people largely agreed with me that Breakdown is indeed better than Citizen Kane.
You put a poll up, and I think it was definitively decided by the voters of Twitter that it was
it's in the books.
Phil pays for bots.
Ratified.
Okay.
Okay, that was a bot swarm. Okay.
But yeah, we've had like Paul Scheer, Sean Fennessy, Kyle Brandt. We just had Bill Gerberi.
I want to talk about The Rock
again for the second time. You know, we've been blessed with Katie Walsh came on to talk about Heat and shared your opinion, by the way, Laura, about Amy Brenneman's character.
Really?
Yes,
oh, that makes me feel better.
To back you up on that was an epic one. We've done
Blake Howard, who you guys have had on. Actually, we had him on the same week covering the same director. You guys did LA Confidential. We did The River Wild. I thought that was like funny.
So yeah, that's our show, Die Hard on a Blank, and
check it out. And where can people? So throw out your socials, Die Hard social, and also your personal socials for people to follow you guys on Twitter.
The podcast is Phil. I don't want to interrupt you. Do you want to?
No,
take it?
Go ahead.
Okay, you're good. At Die Hard OAB on Twitter. You can email us at diehardoab@gmail.com. I am at Liam G. Billingham on Twitter. We're on Instagram. Phil is a huge X guy. Loves Elon. Really into the Cybertruck.
This is a bit that Liam has been doing lately. That I'm going to.
You're a free speecher. You're free speech absolutist, right?
Off mic. I'm at Philip Gawthorne on X.com, and that's basically how you can.
There are a lot of Tenet jokes.
Reach me. Not that anybody does. Yeah, we do a lot of the same shtick, but we love. The truth of it, we truly love action movies. They're also tied into a lot of our memories as well as teenagers falling in love with cinema. And we try and treat the genre with love and affection and talk about these movies maybe a little bit more seriously than they're perhaps given kind of credit for in our culture.
I would say that the biggest thing taking away, Phil brought the show to me to do. We ended up doing it together, right? Like it was his idea, and I think the biggest thing that it's done for me is like made me completely reappreciate these movies that like I kind of treated as disposable in the 90s because I got one of them once a week, and like the astonishing achievement of some of these movies, that you reconsider in a whole new, like The Rock. We just did almost 2 hours with Bilga, and just the things that movie is actually about. Is really exciting and far extends beyond like the idea of like it's cool when someone eats a VX poison gas little ball and like melts on screen, right? Like it's a really great way to read. It is cool. So cool to reconsider these movies and give them more credit than maybe they ever got.
Can we expect some Sean Connery impersonations on your
some
episode?
bad ones for sure? Oh yeah,
excellent.
Yeah, Sean Connery. There's a lot of
little impression.
A lot of Nicolas Cage.
A
lot of Nicolas Cage.
Okay.
What do you say? We cut the chit chat, a-hole, that kind of thing. It's good. Thanks for having us, guys.
Yes, excellent. Thanks for coming on, guys. That was great. And I'll do our socials, and then we'll get out of here. We are at CouchPod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at couchpod.com. And we are in 2 weeks talking about, as aforementioned, Scarface with Glenn Kenny, who recently wrote the book on
rules.
Scarface. So this should be fun.
How do I get one of these t-shirts?
Yeah, what do we get?
Cows in the Field t-shirts.
Oh my God. And buy a t-shirt at cowspod.threadless.com.
Goodbye, Mr. Dillinger.
I'll see you down the road.